What if the shittiest moments of our lives and careers is where the real seeds of possibility lie?
In our podcast, A Life Worth Working, we offer up an extra shit pile episode where messy moments fertilize remarkable futures. Rather than highlighting the shiny milestones of success, we dig into the raw, unfiltered stories behind career and personal transformation.
Here's Matthew Clemente, the Director of Research and Curriculum at the Center for Psychological Humanities and Ethics at Boston College, and his contribution to the shit pile.
Matthew, one of the questions we ask every guest is about one of the shittiest moments in their lives that also led to significant growth. We call them part of our compost pile or our shit pile, where all of this muddy and messiness can actually foster this beautiful and significant growing. So wondering if you could think of a particular moment in your life that has led to that kind of growth for you.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to, I think, the single worst moment of my life, which was I've always wanted to have a big family. I love kids. I love kids and old people. I have since I was little. It's like people my age that I've never quite gotten things right with. And I think because, to tangent just for a minute, I think because my experience with those two populations of people is they just want your attention and are just happy to have your attention. They don't want anything else out of you. They're not seeking something. It's just like you give them attention and they're happy. And that's always been something that I've gravitated to because that I can do well. I can give people my attention, I think. So I've always wanted a big family, and my wife and I, she comes from a very small family and has wanted a big family for that reason. When we got married, we had our first son about, 12 months after we got married. And then we had 3 kids in 4 years. They were all 3 years old and under at the same time.
Wow.
And so it was just chaos in my house and very difficult and trying. After my third child, my daughter, Maria, we went about a year and a half before my wife got pregnant again. And she got pregnant with my son, Anthony. And I had just become used to being a dad in a crazy house and used to her being pregnant and was busy with a lot of things at work and feel like I wasn't as attentive to her pregnancy as I typically was. Usually I'm talking to her stomach and, but I had just been caught up in my life and busy with things. And so in June of 2021, she was about 20 weeks pregnant and she was going to take my 3 kids to go to the ultrasound to see their little brother. I was at home working and I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. And it was her doctor telling me that there was no heartbeat with the baby. And it was one of the most excruciating moments of my life. I didn't expect it. I dropped the phone, and it's one of the only times I'm a very kind of self-possessed person and have been since I was really little. I could not control myself. I just started screaming.
Yeah.
And I could hear that I was screaming, but I couldn't do anything about it. I couldn't stop myself. So, I drove to pick up the kids. Tracy had to go meet with a specialist. And so I went and picked up my kids, brought them over to my parents' house. My mother was fortunately around and she was with them. It was just absolutely the worst experience I've ever had. And I've had some losses in my life, but I was so shocked. I just hadn't anticipated it. It was absolutely devastating. And having to explain to my kids who were old enough to know that something was really wrong. And my oldest was probably 6. And so he was definitely old enough. And really, I had to sit down and talk to them and explain what had happened. Yeah, it's still hard for me to actually articulate it. There are so many awful things about that and about talking the kids through it and being with them in it and also being with my wife. So that was really one of the most, to this day, I mean, I go to the cemetery weekly to my son's gravestone. And I think the hardest thing I've ever had to do was write my son's eulogy and then deliver it.
Wow.
I really didn't know if I'd be able to do it. I have given a number of eulogies, but this one was it felt like it was going to be impossible to give. And I got up in my home parish. A bunch of my family and friends had come to the funeral, which really surprised me. I mean, one of the things that really shocked me was how many people cared about my family. I just was really like overwhelmed by the number of people who just love my family, which I really didn't expect. And I gave the eulogy, and it was absolutely the hardest moment of my life, and also the proudest moment of my life, I would say. And by far and away the best piece of writing I'll ever do. I mean, as a writer, I think about that. Like, I think about the things that I write and how much I try and perfect what I write and really craft things. But this was really the best thing I'll ever write. And I was able to deliver it. And afterwards, I don't think I've ever told anyone this, but the priest gave me a hug and he said to me, "You're an extraordinary man," which I usually hate getting compliments. Like, I'm very uncomfortable with them. It was really meaningful for him to say that to me. It just, everything about that day and moment absolutely cut me right to the heart. So I would say that was by far the shittiest moment of my life. And yet, weirdly and paradoxically, I think one of the most significant moments of my life. And I've noticed profound change in my life since then. My wife and I, we bonded over that in ways that I would have never expected for our marriage, because we're both very kind of thick, hard-headed people. So we butt heads quite a bit. And we were in that together and suffered that together. And then, she got pregnant again, maybe a half a year later. And Anthony was what's called an early stillbirth, right around 20 weeks. My daughter, Victoria, we had just found out that we were having a daughter. My wife was 12 weeks pregnant and lost that pregnancy too. And so this period of my life was just really black. And I really wrestled with whether I would ever be happy again. I mean, that was a question I was asking myself. Could I ever be happy again in my life? But then we went to a number of specialists to find out why my wife, who had such easy pregnancies relatively for the first 3 children, had lost 2 in a row. And really both were in the second trimester, which is pretty uncommon statistically speaking. And we went to some specialists. We got a couple of opinions in Boston. And the answers we got were, we have no idea why, but if you get pregnant again, it's likely that this will happen again. So don't get pregnant again. And that was really devastating to both of us, because we both wanted to keep growing our family. We felt ready to grow our family. And so it took me a long time to reconcile myself to the fact that I wouldn't be the father that I wanted to be with this kind of big, crazy family. I mean, 3 kids is big, obviously, but I had always thought I'd have 5, 6 kids and, that would be my life. And so we said, okay, we're not going to try and get pregnant. We're going to avoid getting pregnant, and we're going to that's it. That maybe we'll adopt someday. I don't know. And my wife got pregnant very unexpectedly. I mean, like, we were doing everything to avoid pregnancy, and I had absolutely not anticipated that. I was terrified. I was really, really terrified that the same thing was going to happen again. And I remember for 10 months, every single morning, I would wake up, I would go into my closet by myself, I would kneel down, and I would just pray, please don't let this child die, please. That was like every morning. But I was convinced that every time she had an appointment, that I was going to get a phone call that we had lost another pregnancy. And that was a very long, trying period of my life. Very long. Up until the day of delivery, I thought, we're going to lose this pregnancy. And I remember running my dog the morning that my wife was scheduled to be induced. And the whole run, I almost was having like a panic attack. I was thinking, oh my God, I'm going to lose this baby today. Like I knew, just this terrible feeling. And then my daughter, Teresa, was born. And it was an absolute miracle. And she is the happiest, sweetest, smartest little girl. She's almost 2. And she's just a complete joy and so in answer to the question of whether I could ever be happy again or not, I just am overwhelmed thinking of her. She is just the most wonderful girl. And the shittiest time in my life has opened itself to some of the happiest moments of my life.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you. Wow. You encountered such loss and grief, because the loss of a child like that is not just the loss of the child, it's the loss of the future that you were planning as well. And so there's so much compounding grief there. Wow. But thank you for sharing your courage and your strength through that.
Well, I think, if I did have any strength in the midst of that, it was really my wife, who we were in it together,
Yeah.
with one another. And then again, seeing the community of people that I had around me really just blew me away. You don't really realize how many people are invested in your life until something like that happens. And then, at least in my experience, it just completely overwhelmed me.
Did it shift your understanding of suffering at all, Matthew, too, for as a moral philosopher? I'm sure you've studied this and thought about it in an intellectual way, but then to be somebody literally living a dark night of the soul, how did that shift things for you, or did it?
Because so much of what I do intellectually revolves around death and suffering, you get to a point as a thinker where you feel like, oh yeah, no, this is an area that I understand, and I had suffered. I mean, I've had a number of losses over the years of people I've been very, very close with. And you think like, okay, no, I understand suffering. Like I got this. I understand it intellectually. I've lived it. That experience, I felt like I entered depths in my life, and that my wife and I together went through something that I couldn't have comprehended. And I think that the thing that really changed for me is I had become really, in my thinking, I don't want to say cynical, but when you spend a lot of time thinking about death and meaning, and whether it's possible to have meaning in light of death, and you read a lot of existential philosophy, and your own life has lent itself to a lot of suffering, you start to become kind of just jaded intellectually. I would never have called myself a very hopeful person. I would have called myself very, funny, but again, morbidly funny, darkly funny. And I could see the bright side of, awful, ugly situations or something like that, or the humor at least. But the thing that has changed for me profoundly is I felt like I experienced when my daughter Teresa was born. I don't even really know how to articulate it, but this kind of like something impossible can happen. Something that I was certain and adamant would not happen. The doctors had told us, if you have another child, get pregnant again, you're going to lose the pregnancy. Do not do it, And so that to me had become this hard certainty. And it took me so long to reconcile myself with a certainty that I didn't want to be the case. But then I did this kind of intellectual thing. Well, resign yourself, because life is very hard and lots of people don't get what they want out of life. And you wanted to be this type of father and you won't be. So resign yourself to that and be rational about it and accept it. And then something that just absolutely surprised me and I never would have expected happened. And that has been the biggest change for me, is to say, wow, in the teeth of the most grueling of experiences, there's still a seed of hope, like that's possible. And even saying it now, I feel kind of uncomfortable, because I had kind of formed this image of myself as this jaded philosopher, yeah. I teach Camus, and, these are like, this is not, it's kind of weird to say, but yeah, that's been the biggest change for me.
It's interesting. I was thinking of how just pivotal it was that the priest hugged him, told him he was an extraordinary man. When I thought of the priest doing that, and just saying that and holding him, like it's so it's really beautiful.
Right.
Yeah.
What comes to mind as you say that too? This came out in Matthew's story of not being afraid of suffering, like our own suffering or the suffering of others, and how often we don't know what to do when people are in grief. And so we avoid it, right? It's like, I don't know what to say, so I'm not going to send the card. Or if I stop by with food, what would I say when I saw how upset they are? And suffering can be just so hard to encounter and to know how to show up and be present for. And Matthew talked about his ability to kind of be present to suffering, everything from doing education in prisons to dealing with his own really deep suffering around the loss of 2 of his children. So, and how powerful that is when we're able to kind of withstand those moments of suffering and be in it for the people that really need us in that time.
Yeah. I forget how he put it, but it was sort of like to live through suffering.
Right. Yeah.
The article I sent you, this really famous MacArthur Genius Award winning author, Yi-Yun Lee, she teaches over at Princeton. Her 2 sons both killed themselves.
Oh my gosh.
Just devastating. When my best friend sent me the article, she thought she was misreading the article because she knew that her first son had killed himself. But then when she saw this other article, she thought it was a repeat, and even one of the author's friends, when she got the text message, her second son had killed himself. She thought it was a mistake from the first son. I mean, it's just unimaginable.
Right.
And she talks about suffering a lot. And she says, I think she says that her one regret is that she wished she could have conveyed to her sons that there are ways to suffer better. Right. And this idea of living through suffering. What's fascinating is Matthew, the book that he recommended to his best friend to read was the book that her second son was reading right before he killed himself because he was trying to make meaning of his life. But this idea that we can live through suffering is part of this way that we think about a life worth working and living.
Right. And that, not that we want to expect suffering, but just acknowledging that suffering is part and parcel of life, right? It can't be avoided. And in fact, if we try to avoid suffering in our lives, or we try to, often as parents, we want to have our kids' lives have no suffering, right? We're taking out those opportunities for growth, for meaning, for struggle that leads to a greater sense of knowing who they are, being able to receive help from others, that there can be so much that comes out of suffering. So, there's this Jewish book around raising kids called The Blessing of the Skin Knee. And I always love that, just that notion of we hate when our kids skin their knees and fall when they're just learning to walk. But just seeing there can be a blessing in just helping them to navigate pain and struggle, even for all of us.
It gets back to what Scarlett Lewis talks about in terms of post-traumatic growth, right?
Yeah.
And it's so important for young people especially to understand that pain is going to happen.
Right. There's also difference like suffering and pain, they say, right? Like pain is just going to come. Suffering's what we do when we're avoiding the pain or resisting the pain, that, it's kind of this added layer of how we're encountering what's happening in our lives. So there's just going to be what happens in life, the painful things, the loss, the grief, the heartache, the failure, the job unemployment. But how we respond to that is where we find suffering or where we find persistence and perseverance through it and growth.
Matthew's story is a powerful testament to the idea that nothing is wasted. Often, moments of suffering have the potential to become the sacred ground for growth.
Because sometimes what looks like an ending is actually compost for the next beginning. We're so grateful to Matthew Clemente for sharing his experience with us. Please don't forget to listen to his longer episode with us on A Life Worth Working.
And here's to the shit pile. Please subscribe and share with your loved ones and friends who may also be searching for more meaning and purpose in their lives and work.